All right, welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. And today we're going to be talking about indoor cannabis opportunities for irrigation contractors. And I'll tell you why I thought this was such an important subject. And number one, I think it's important because I think we're starting to feel maybe around the nation a little bit of a slowdown in for irrigation contractors. So that's number one. Number two, I've also felt that there's a real need for some professional help, experienced help working in this indoor cannabis industry because water is so important to them. And, this is a group that really does have a high level of interaction with water and knows a lot about the water they're applying and how to apply it. So then I thought, well, if we mix some really good contractors together with some people that are super interested in what's going on with what they're growing and how much water they're giving it and how they're giving it and what nutrients are in it, then we've got a match made in heaven. And then so I talked to Michael Derewenko about this. Now, Michael has a really unique background, right? He's been an irrigation contractor. He's worked for manufacturers. He's worked in marketing. He's been hands-on in irrigation in a way that a lot of people haven't been. And then he stepped up for Jane a few years ago and took on this role helping indoor growers with their systems. And man, this is a business area that has been just growing and no pun intended, incredibly. So, and if you know Michael, right, you know about his background, you know his love for irrigation, and you know how important quality is to him. Then you think, well, he's a perfect speaker to be talking about this because he's doing this real time, helping people all over the United States do it, and we're all learning as a result. So, Michael, thanks very much for coming on and joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Michael, the first thing I think about, right? I worked for a contractor for many years. Can we really move from outdoor to indoor? Is that like acceptable? Not acceptable, but even a natural tendency, right? That just doesn't feel right to a lot of contractors, I think.
Yeah, I mean, our tools have evolved, the innovations in our products that we use, and the components of irrigation systems have evolved. And a lot of that ingenuity is going towards the outdoor applications of these products. So, anything from swing joints to, like we were talking about prior, grounding rods. I don't think in along 70s, 80s, even in the 90s, when I started doing irrigation, besides outside of Florida, we weren't really grounding a lot of controllers. We're in Texas as well. So most of the innovation has gone into the outdoor aspect. But like you said, a few years ago, Jane really wanted to tackle some of the hurdles and challenges that contractors are faced with inside. And so we started to develop products, assemblies, manifolds that hopefully make a contractor's life easier inside. And the reason we did that was because a lot of contractors were a little apprehensive to go from using a ditch witch to climbing a 12-foot ladder inside, and avoiding slip and fall accidents. It can be a little overwhelming, and we just want to put some of those myths at ease, and that it's not as bad as everybody thinks, and it's a great opportunity for contractors that seasonally might have a little bit of downtime.
Yeah, and when I first looked at this photo, I thought, particularly the one on the right, yeah, if I just look at that as an open field, an open plot, an open backyard, that it's a blank slate that I'm going to create. And really, I think a lot of the irrigation is going to remain similar. But before we get into that, I really want to understand how big this market is, right? Is there a big opportunity here?
Yeah, there is a big opportunity. I mean, every state that I travel to, one conversation leads to three more lead to six more, and it just grows and grows and grows. And the one thing I'm learning is, as much as there is a promotional network for a lot of growers, Instagram, social media to promote kind of what they're growing, I think on the contractor side, there's not a lot of contractors going on, Annie's List or Yelp or whatever the local contracting guide is for people to choose them. A lot of them come directly to us, the manufacturer. I know it happens with all of our other colleagues at other companies as well. A lot of them don't have the expertise or resources to give to them. And so what we've really tried to do is identify that. Most of our viewers and the people that follow us know that, education and providing these technical tools to make their lives easier is our number one priority. And, As I've traveled, we've tried to make sure that the resources and products we provide are kind of curtailed to the different regions, because each region grows things differently. Even indoors, some grow stuff on pots on the ground, some grow it on trays and tables. And to your point on the last slide about the bringing things indoors, I think as irrigation contractors, we're really used to working outdoors, and there's already so much going on just trying to, delegate our labor force. That's why general contractors and architects on sites, consultants can sometimes make our heads spin, because we're already focusing on things. And I think bringing things indoors does require more communication than we're used to. We're having to deal with fire codes, drains that we weren't used to. So there's some things like that do require more communication. But more often than not, if not 99% of the time in my travels, everybody's figuring it out at the same time. The people that are putting the reservoirs inside, that they've never done it before with the forklift, are doing it. They're learning. And so it's a really good kind of market to be a part of right now. Because everyone's kind of bouncing ideas off of each other and trying to find better ways to do it, safer ways, cheaper ways to do it. And so I think that's why, as you go around, if you're a contractor in these different states, you have to take that into account, that your lack of knowledge of this is not going to be laughed at. No, everybody's kind of trying to figure it out. And that's why this presentation today is so crucial, because I think in the last 3 months, the number one question I get is, do you have an installing contractor? Do you have a contractor that, I don't care where they live, can they come out here and do it? Most of the work is done, permitted by the general contractor in the area. Some plumbers are getting the work, but more often than not, I'm getting the question, do you know a landscape contractor or irrigation contractor that can come out here and at least just give us pointers, tell us how to do it, or take the job on themselves?
Yeah. Well, this map we're looking at is really eye-opening, right? There's a lot of dark green on here, which is fully legalized, recreational and medical, right? And there's a lot of states. What is even more impactful is there's only 4 states left where it's fully illegal. So you can see a trend here, and you can see which way the trend's been going, and that's what I'm wondering, right? I'm answering my own question, but in your mind, is this just a fad, right? I saw some companies just blow up and grow big for a couple of years and have slowed down now. I don't want to take my contractor business and move it this way and be looking for something else in a couple of years. Is this just a fad?
So, 3 years, I really got deep into this. 7 years, I've been working with growers across the country for hemp and whatnot. And in those 7 years, while markets have gone up and down, saturation of inventory, I understand California has some issues getting rid of supply sometimes, but what's never been a problem is contractor necessity. Everyone's always been looking for somebody to install the product. I truly think that some of the downturns on the manufacturing side is because people can't find an installing contractor. How many projects do we touch at Jane where somebody is waiting to buy the product from us and they can't find anybody to install it? They've got to figure out how to do it. So I've never seen a lack of contractor demand. That's never been the problem. It's always been the opposite. And so when that day comes, I think it'll be a good thing for contractors.
Yeah, I think too, this is what I have known in every industry I've ever been in. Any launch I've ever seen is that the people who get in first, get the business first, keep the business. And the people who get in later are the ones that tend to struggle the most. And so based on what you just said, it seems like it's time to get in.
Yeah, I think most irrigation contractors, even landscapers out there, if you can have a pivot to other opportunities, what do we know? Irrigation contractors that put in curbing, different things. I think that's it's going to be the key to success, and I think this should be something like that, where maybe you're not doing it full time, but where some contractors in the north, when it's frozen over installing landscape lighting, maybe this is something that you're kind of doing as an ancillary effort. And it's really not that hard to get into. The network of people that irrigation contractors already deal with in the landscape market are the same people that are selling the product and essentially supporting it, or have the connections to support it through the manufacturers. So it's really not that difficult. And that's why I tell contractors all the time, if most of them don't even have to go looking for the work comes to them. But I did want to mention a couple easy ways that if you are new to this, and you were a dark green on one of those states, you should definitely be looking after it. If you're not going through your local landscape agency, just to ask, the local nursery, I'm sure knows somebody that's growing or needs the help. But manufacturers, reps are always somewhere to lean on. Your major distributors across the country. Remember, their outside sales guys are talking to each other all the time. So a company like Site One, you might be dealing with one branch, but remember that outside sales guy is talking to the counties around there, and they've probably more than likely got the work. I deal with probably 12 different states right now. And only one of them is Florida. So the work's coming from anywhere between Zoom calls and, being able to send samples. We're able to get a project up and running almost till, you need to break ground. And another one is local hydroponic shops. If you're not familiar with some items that are for the indoor installations, and we're going to review some components here in a second, pop it into your local hydroponic shop. I would try to stay away from the really little, like kind of niche-y ones. But the larger ones, Green Coast Hydroponics is a great customer of ours on the West Coast. They have 18, 20 branches at this point. You can pop into those. They've got growers coming in all the time. Leave your card. And I guarantee they would love to have that resource, because right now they're struggling to provide that, somebody to install it for you.
Yeah, a couple things. One, my local hydroponics store, they offer free compost tea to everybody Saturday morning. So you go down there and they've got a stream of people coming in to get the free compost tea, and they're buying a bunch of other stuff too. Smart marketing is what I thought about that. Two, I would think if I was a contractor out there, I would really spend a lot of time talking to you, because you probably know all the opportunities. So I'd be calling you on that. And three, I think, but this is a question, I'm looking for, you would know this. I think a lot of the labor for landscapes already moved over there.
Yeah, it has. And like you were saying, the promotional things that hydroponic shops are doing, a lot of them offer design. Design's great, but no one to install it. And so a lot of times as a contractor, you'll have a grower that already has a design in their hands because somebody's done it. Either the distributor did it to get their business to buy the product from there, so they provided a design, or a manufacturer like Jane has taken care of the design under the hope that you'll use our product. So as a contractor, you're just coming in to install it, read the blueprint and install the products. It's usually pretty easy. That's another apprehension with contractors is, am I gonna have to design it? And we'll talk a little bit about how there are consistencies in design, but most of the time the indoor growers, the larger projects have plans already that have been permitted and approved through a general contractor, and you simply have to go in and do the installation and help with the support of the product. So I think it's low-hanging fruit. And then as far as your other questions, yes, exactly. You kind of answered them yourself, but I think between the local hydroponic shops and, there's some trade magazines also that if you really want to get into to know some of the products, the more you can install, the more money you can make, just like pump systems for irrigation or smart controllers, or, really pushing the extent of the market is the same here. If you learn how to install RO systems and, indoor pump systems, then it's that much more money you can make.
Yeah, so a couple of things I just want to remind everybody, we've got the chat and the Q&A open. So if you've got some questions that you want to ask Michael, put them in there and I'll forward them on to him. And then maybe some comments in the chat. We always love to hear from our viewers. So the other thing on that last slide, Michael, COVID killed a lot of conferences. Is this MJ Business conference, is it worth going to? Does anybody go to it?
Yeah, I mean, and especially the ones in Nevada. If you live in Nevada, there's so many growers there, and most of the business is inside for obvious reasons. We go to this show. We're actually a part of this MJ BizCon this year. We're gonna have a really nice booth there, and one of the main reasons we want to be there is to make sure that the end user, the distributor, and the installing contractor all feel supported. I mean, the whole network needs to feel supported, just like we do on the landscape side. If you're a contractor in that area, it's more than worth the money. I know it's a few $100s to go, but you go with a stack of business cards. Growers are looking for more contractors. If I owned a contracting company, I'd have a booth there talking about contracting. We have a distributor that does some installation and design. but they only operate in a certain part of the country. So go network, and that's where you get your leads. Even if you can't find one person there that needs your services, I guarantee you're going to leave, and within a week, you're going to have people hitting you up for it. People are willing to travel. Most of the companies we deal with, the installers out of California and Colorado, travel to do the installations. They're usually not installing where they're at. So you're going to get some frequent flyer miles potentially and learn how to travel and pack your bins with your tools. But it's pretty easy considering the challenges we have in outdoors.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, you really perked my ears up there, right? If people are traveling to do this business, it's because there's some good margins in it. And so if I'm a contractor, I don't want anybody traveling into my area to do the business I could be getting great margins on because I don't have to travel.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's going to take some refinement to the processes that we're used to, but once you dial it, I mean, people do it for building. I mean, think about movie productions. everything is flown and driven. It's not as hard to work remotely as it used to be, and to travel with these things. The airlines are used to it. UPS is used to it. You can ship tools in advance. It's really not hard to get the resources you need. Not to mention, if you have a great distributor partner like Ewing, Horizon, Site One, if you need a shovel or you need a ladder, you've got somewhere to go. So, I mean, you have that localized network, even if you're not from there. I mean, if you're a Site One customer, you're a Site One customer across the country. So as you travel into those areas, let the outside sales guy know, hey, I'm going to be in the area doing a big cannabis install. You can drop my name and they can call and yell at me for not giving them enough notice, but they're going to be excited that you're bringing opportunity in their area because they're all very well aware of it. They talk about it at their big meetings. So they're just looking for more installing contractors and customers willing to do it.
Wow. Wow. I'm looking at this chart and these numbers and I'm thinking, man, if I'm an alcohol manufacturer, I'm starting to get worried here.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I remember when I bought my first ditch witch trencher, I was like, are people going to need irrigation in 5 years? Is this a good investment? So I understand that there's some infrastructure and some of those things I just listed that you kind of got to get dialed in before you want to take the leap. But charts like this, they're a dime a dozen, and they all go up. So I mean, there is plenty of business. If you think about how much Advil is sold daily in this country, and how much of that market could be taken over by the hemp, CBD, and cannabis market, and, the different products that we haven't even tapped into, it's just going to continue to grow, and as it goes more legal across the country, definitely.
Yeah, well, and I also think too, the opioids or any of those very addictive painkillers, this is this can be a really good alternative.
Yeah, and that's actually a valid point. I don't really have a slide in here about the stigma of the industry. I mean, I could understand how that could be an issue. Once again, just like everybody else is learning how to deal with the variables on site of the installation, I think everybody is also a little more lackadaisical on the stigma of it. I think people do realize it's more of a cash crop than it used to be. I think when you go inside, and different contractors can talk to me offline and we could verse them, and I could spend a whole webinar on just kind of etiquette when you go into these places. You want to hold your oohs and ahs a little bit. Also, remember, most of the time when you're going in to install an irrigation system, it's just open rooms like that first slide. So you're spending most of your time just putting irrigation on trays and running pipes up and down the walls before the plants even get in there. I mean, ideally, you're out of there before the plants get there. But if you've got to come do some support on the follow-up, make sure you always wear your hats. All growers have really bad mite problems. They don't want mites moving from one room to another. We're coming from outside inside. So before you invite 3 of your closest, laborers to come and check out this cool cannabis site, remember, they want as few people in those rooms as possible when those plants are growing. And so you just have to be wary of that. The idea is you install your irrigation system, you can leave and you don't even have to go back in there. They can do all their yielding and harvesting without interrupting the irrigation. It's all very easy for them. The idea is not like where you're mowing a yard every week and you're constantly in there. The idea is you install it and you come back, 3 months later, once they've yielded, and if they have any problems, you're taking care of when the plants aren't in there. Those plants are too valuable to be walking in there, rubbing up against them all day.
So, Michael, we've got a question coming in, and this person's asking, does this require a lot of special training?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to irrigation. We have some design guides that could walk you through some of the differences. We're going to some of the differences right here, and then we're also going to review some of the consistencies. I would say the consistencies are easily 80 to 85% the knowledge we already have from being contractors working outside. I think there's probably some slip and fall, or I know there's some slip and fall and some safety measures that need to be taken into account, but a lot of it's common sense, and it's probably more insurance and liability based than it is, connecting pipes. You're still gluing pipes together the same way. Indoors, some of the guys like to use Schedule 80 because it doesn't have to be replaced as often. The look of it, and it's built for permanency, so it's going to last a long time. So there's little things like that, but this is where a designer or a grower is going to come to the contractor and say, hey, this is what I prefer. And you're going to say, okay, why? And they're going to tell you, and you're going to say, okay, fine. It's not going to be, hey, you're doing it wrong. This is how you do it. And so there's really that communication and that back and forth that has to happen because every project is different. And I would say if there's any training involved, it's going to be the how to communicate what you know is right and what the grower wants, to find a perfect solution for both of you. But besides that, it does not require too much different.
Right. Okay, that's good to hear. Yeah, I'm looking at this right here, and I'm thinking, well, if I have been using any compost teas, things like that, I recognize everything here. Yeah, I've probably installed something like this before. Fertigation, valves. It all looks pretty familiar.
It does, yeah. And like I said, I still walk into projects and am still blown away by some of the things I see. I grew up having reservoirs outside for, like you said, for nutrients and putting them into systems for hedges and turf. Same thing. I mean, there's a bay door in these water rooms, so you're able to move a reservoir inside. Major distributors, if they don't sell reservoirs, they can help you source one. You can get them anywhere in the country. So the batch tank aspect of this, in this particular application, they're pulling clean water and then they're using the tanks solely for nutrients to mix it up and then shoot it into the system. And then the middle one is, a dosatron system, which is just like fertigation. We use Maisie, so it's all just venturi suction, the same thing we're using outside. And you said fertigation, Richard, in landscape. I think fertigation, kind of like drip, had a bad rap for a long time. I think a lot of the components involved and the way that it was being installed in the late 90s, early 2000s, when it was trying to make a comeback, were poorly done. They didn't use parts that were UV protected, so they became brittle and chipped apart. Tanks were buried in weird areas where you couldn't really fill them. And then nozzles would get clogged, rotor seals would get burned up, because there was no communication between the fertigation companies and the people that were manufacturing the products. And so I think there were some hurdles to come through. And the good thing about working indoors is those seals and whatnot fail outside. None of that, you don't have to deal with that inside. The diaphragms have been, this has been taken into account. So even if you're using something that's a little more acidic, it's not going to eat away at the components. So, learning how these products react to a system is going to be the first step in the new endeavor.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And yeah, I can remember in the 90s spending some time on the Las Vegas Strip, helping some of the big resorts with their irrigation, and every one of them had fertigation tanks. They were all big users, and you didn't see it that much in California at the time. And but they adopted quickly, and did it right.
I think one of the concerns, which is a good topic for here, is the backflow aspect. I mean, in Florida, here we're really concerned because so many people use their public water supply or utility water supply to irrigate their yard. And if you just tap right into it, you're sucking down fertilizer every time you drink water. And so there's a reason that a backflow preventer exists on the system and is required by permit. And so it's the same thing. Most of these systems, if not all of them, are independent of themselves. And so, the fertigation that you're talking about, that's all commercial. So it's solely used for watering plants. Nobody's drinking out of it, ideally. And there's no water fountains or cross-contamination issues. And so that's the perfect application for a fertigation. The medians of Vegas, yes, perfect. You don't have to have a guy walking in heavy traffic with heavy liability. Same thing here. This is an independent system. And so you have to take that knowledge and cross it over here. Is the only people that are going to be poisoned by anything are the plants. And so because they're so valuable, you just really want to keep an eye on that. And as you can see in the second slide here, we're monitoring parts per million. And this particular installation has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different forms of nutrients. I'm sure there's a pH balancer in there. And they're using them at any different time. So they're turning them on and off as it cycles. And then they have an ET water controller with a flow sensor that's monitoring the total flow or total water usage. And so we know when one of these 50-gallon drums is empty in our watering cycle, we look at our flow report, and our flow report says we use 40,000 gallons of water, but we should have only used half of this jug. It's a very easy metric to follow through with and say, where is all our nutrients going? Because that's the number one most expensive part, second to labor, on these projects.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that. They're using a smart controller, not for the ET data, but for the flow data.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
fabulous.
when you got water inside, as you can see, there's a lot. That's a lot of pipe connected to the walls. One bad glue job, and no one's there. You're going to be losing a lot of water. And so, the idea of no flow sensor and no master valve inside is just not possible. Most growers will say, "Oh, we've always got someone here." If you've got 12 rooms and you got a guy in the front clipping stuff, there's no way he's going to get back there in time where your $1,000 lights aren't going to get fried. So that's a huge concern a lot of times for the people going in through doing the inspection on the electrical side and the fire breaks. They're looking at make sure that there's not going to be a problem with the electricity of the water.
Yeah. So if you get the high flow, then what happens with the controller?
The controller is going to shut down, move to the next valve if we've set it up properly. I mean, that's why I always under zone or over zone systems. I want to make sure that every table has a zone to it. And just like we do outside, we're kind of used to stretching the flow demands of a hydraulic valve outside, 3/4 inch and 1 inch, to make sure that we can get as many heads on a zone as possible. Excuse me. Well, inside we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we zone it out properly. Maybe each long table, as you'll see here in a second, is its own zone. So if we have failure, we're only having failure at a minimal level.
Yeah. Okay, good. So, wow, what a great illustration you have here.
Yeah. And so this is essentially a 4x8 table. I try to think of it, in smaller terms. This is a piece of plywood, basically. So, we've got a valve. Obviously, we're not going to run a 3/4 1 inch valve that can run up to 15 to 18 gallons per minute, and 12 to 18 pop-ups. It's been a while since I did overhead, but 12 to 18 pop-ups on a valve. Inside, this is going to be a 40-foot, 50-foot long table. And so the idea of most growers, the rooms, they're much like bowling alleys. They're long and skinny because you can only be about 20-foot wide before there's going to be some fear of fire, because it's just going to get so hot that no matter what paneling you put on the wall, it's going to melt, or the trays are going to. So what they're going to do is most of them are going to be broken up into kind of chambers, and you're going to have 3 or 4 tables, sometimes 5. They're going to be rolling so they can connect next to each other, so you can use the footprint of the aisles to grow more and really kind of centralize your plants under the lights or get them away from the walls. But remember that the people that are harvesting the plants want to be able to reach over all the way to the middle of the table. So having a 20-foot wide table does nobody any good. Just like kind of nursery tech is, everything's about 6 foot wide max, because you want to be able to reach across it. So the tables are always going to be about 4 to 5 feet wide. And then they're just going to vary in length. So hydraulically, it shouldn't be any more complex than putting a 40 or 50-foot table on a 1 inch valve, because you're downsizing the size of the zone. You're not pushing your hydraulics, which is usually the challenge outside. It shouldn't be, but people do try to challenge that. Inside, I think as long as you get that 0.5 or 1 gallons per minute running through the valve, it's going to open and close fine. And you're going to use, I typically, for a 50-foot long table and a 1 inch valve, we usually range about 6 to 8 gallons per minute. And that's either with octobubblers or with little click tiff pressure compensating assemblies. That's my target, which is about half what the flow of a valve is capable of. But that way, like you said, if there's a failure when I'm not there, the flow sensor can trigger it, move on, and you only have one table that didn't get watered for 1 night or 2 nights, not a whole room with 2,500 plants in it.
Yeah, I really like that conservative approach to it.
Yeah, and then remember, we don't want water on the ground, so this is kind of showing how the trays have lips on them. So a lot of the water is captured through drains. You can put them into a bucket. Some of the more advanced places have already cut, kind of trenches in the ground for drainage to make sure that everything stays dry. We don't want anyone slipping and falling inside. And these trays a lot of them are custom built now, especially the sliding ones. So they're expensive. So you want to make sure that when your guys are installing around them, they're not leaving tools that are going to get wet and leave rust rings on them. it's, I don't want to say it, full hospital mode, but it is pretty medical. I mean, remember, this stuff is, once the plants go in there, it goes on lockdown. But even when you're going in and out of there, you want to put your cap back on your PVC glue, little things like that. Once you spill something in there, it's very expensive. So, a lot of the guys that I see, they'll put down tarps and stuff wherever they're working just to make sure that there's nothing gets on the ground, because it's all coated with fireproof stuff. So, I mean, little things like that, meticulous work, but that's what you bill for. And that's what these growers are prepared to pay for. They want the job done right. So you just have to take that into account when you're bidding and quoting them.
That's such a refreshing thing to hear as a contractor, right? They want the job done right, because a lot of people I deal with as a contractor, they want the job done at the lowest price. So,
yeah, I mean, I bid things wrong for a long time. And, my dad was in the industry and he was always like, bid double, because worst case scenario, if you lose the whole thing and you got to replace it, you're at least getting back to zero by covering it. And I think most people do that. Most contractors do that as rule of thumb, maybe not double, but when I would replace a pump that's been replaced 3 times in the last month, and I'm charging the same amount every time, and it's something it's an on-site variable causing the issue, there's a redundancy there where it says, look, you need to upsize your pump, or you need to deal with this, and here it's going to cost a little more to do it right. And I think that's where we're at. And I think most people want it done right. Plus, remember, it's inside. So, you're not really as privy to lightning strikes and surges. If it's protected properly, the system's protected. And if it's installed and bracketed properly to the walls, as you can see in this photo here, that stuff's not moving. I mean, those rolling benches, they roll back and forth to eliminate the aisle space. And we put vinyl tubing on the ends with quick connects to make sure that if you need to disconnect it to do maintenance on the system, you can. But it's also completely flexible and everything's there. You can bump into it. If anything does get broken off, the manifolds can be replaced component at a time. So once it's installed properly, it shouldn't require the maintenance that we do when we're running an edger or a Dixie chopper over stuff every day, So the compatibility is there.
Yeah. All right, great.
Yeah. I mean, these are some simple system components. It's obviously all drip. We're not using any overhead. There are some spray stakes that are used that create a little bit of a fan spray, but that just leads to humidity, and eliminating humidity in these rooms is crucial to the growers. So we really just want to apply water right to the base, very slow over a long period of time, let the plant get the nutrients the best they can. And we've done this through drip manifolds, anything from our little ClickTiff pre-assembled ClickTiff pressure compensated button emitter to our manifolds. And the first question is going to be, when do I use a manifold and when do I use a ClickTiff emitter by itself? Well, it's very simple. Plant count. If you've got an octobubbler, you got 8 plants around that. So you can put 2 arrowed little drippers in one plant. Now you've got 4 on each one. So the main reason people do it usually is control over more plants. As you can see down below, we had 1,600 plants or 700 plants on each one of these tables. We needed as many manifolds pressure compensated as possible. So we had to surround it with octobubblers. If we were doing a single lateral line down the middle with less plants and bigger pots, we'd probably use pre-assembled ClickTiff emitters. That way we're only, kind of half the plant count. So a lot of times I start with how many plants are you putting on this table, and I work backwards.
Yeah. So why is pressure compensating important?
Well, once again, nutrient control. I mean, we're controlling nutrients here, not as much as we are water. The water is kind of most of the times one of the least concerns of the expense of what's going into the system. In most places, in California, obviously not as much, but if you're applying it at such a slow rate, you're really not using nearly as much water or is focused on the price of water as you are your nutrients. Your nutrients are expensive to move, they're expensive to buy. I know there's a waiting list for some now that cost people money on growing. So it all just adds up. So the better we can do at monitoring the nutrients, the better. And then also the plant doesn't want a huge amount of nutrients and water all at once when it can't drink it. Remember, the same irrigation system is being used for about 65 to 75 days on the same plant. And so you want to make sure that you're constantly irrigating at a consistent rate, and then you're only changing how long it's getting watered to alter, how much the plant's nutrients and water it's getting. But it essentially is getting the exact same amount of water every second or minute that goes by. You're just changing the scheduling to account for that.
Right. Okay. All right. I understand. That's great.
Yeah, it is truly micro irrigation. We're putting down micro amounts of water and nutrients to the plant base. And as I've outlined here, some system components we're very familiar with. These are the same components we use inside. Instead of burying them in a valve pit, we're mounting them to the wall. We use ball valves for maintenance, just like we do. Unions you can use inside. We typically don't use them outside as much, but we use them inside because if something needs to be maintenance, it's easier. Also, I put everything at eye sight, like kind of chest high for maintenance, so you don't have to put it on the ground for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it's a lot less digging. It looks nice. I think about when first time I saw a system like that, it was for a baseball field, right? This is what they have all indoors, under the stands. They have it all lined up like that. So interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how Petco had it. Yep. Yeah. So same, meticulous, but if you run a ditch witch anywhere in this country, there's rocks some places, there's caliche clay some places, there's swamps some places. So you've got your digging variables. That same kind of meticulous timing that's going to go into that is going to go into this inside. And most of the time you're going to have air conditioning. So it's not nearly as bad as dealing with that, and there's no weather to deal with. So if it's freezing cold outside, you could be doing this inside.
Yeah.
I don't want to spend too much time on this. If there's irrigation contractors watching this, they're familiar with these products. If they're not, there's some simple definitions of things we really want to focus on inside. Just like we do drip systems outside, we really want to focus on filtering and flushing inside. We do have a little bit of water that we have to disperse or get rid of when we flush, and when we have some runoff, very little bits of runoff if we're doing this properly. Typically, it goes into a 5-gallon bucket. I don't see too many sites that are losing so much water that they need drainage ditches to displace it. That would make me think that you're either considerably overwatering or using the wrong components. So let me know, send me an email and we can work on that. But the only other difference is the vinyl tubing. Like I mentioned before, we don't use vinyl tubing much in outside irrigation. I know 1/4-inch vinyl tubing is sometimes used for nurseries. We prefer polyethylene outside. It's a little bit better on the UV, so it's gonna maybe not be as flexible, but it's gonna last longer. Well, inside we use vinyl because we need that flexibility, and we really don't need as much UV protection. So that flexibility allows us to kind of move tubing where we don't want to use PVC. Like I said, areas where you're going to be detaching it from a valve, where we're going under sweeps to come from the walls over to the tables. It's just easier to use vinyl in a conduit so you can pull it in and out. You're not using PVC. And just a couple more pieces of image that kind of paint the story of how a typical valve manifold is installed. Like I said, that flex line goes into the ground, where when the foundation was the drains were being put into this room in particular, they put sweeps in, just like electrical sweeps, to come up underneath it into the table. And so the vinyl actually runs out of the secondary side of the valve into the ground and comes back up under the table. So when the plants are all filling the room, like you see on the right, you're not tripping over the vinyl connection. It's in the ground. So, I mean, that is the proper way to do it. Is it the more difficult way? Yes, but once it's done, you should never have to worry about it. And then if anything ever needs to be upsized in tubing or downsized, you've got sweeps, just like electrical conduit, that you could alter the whole time.
Michael, we've got a question coming in from the audience, and somebody's asking, do we recycle this water that comes out? So
most of the time at the ends of these tables, like for instance, where this flush valve is, there's a 5-gallon bucket underneath there. They're doing, the growers are usually monitoring the water, not because of necessarily usage, but they're looking at the parts per million. They're doing tests on this to see exactly what kind of contact the plants are coming into they're coming into contact with. And so most of the time it's tested. You're not usually getting that much water. You could get it and pour it right back into the plant, and it's probably going to go right through and come out. But recycling the water, reclamating the water is usually not a huge priority. Remember, the plant has taken most of the nutrients out of the water that you've provided. So you're kind of giving them backwash. I don't know that you'd be moving the needle that much on the growth pattern of the plant. If anything, you take them outside and, remember you're inside. So go outside and give it to your hedge for your landscaping, because I just don't see that much runoff. Most of the guys are pretty on top of it.
So they're watering an effective amount and not causing any runoff, and that's great to hear.
And now that I think about it, I know the argument's going to come up. Well, there is flushing that's involved. A lot of these lines, as you can see, you can't see in this particular image where the valves are on the wall, but there's a whole nother kind of ball valve manifold next to this that you can switch the quick connects from the hydraulic valves over for flushing. And so in between plant cycles, each room, they'll take the quick connect off, connect it to another quick connect with a ball valve, and they'll either run CO2 through it, they'll run anything to destabilize any contaminants that might exist in the PVC. And so we're flushing these systems. So when that's done, it's going into a drain or into a 5-gallon bucket and somebody's readily getting rid of it. But most of the time, if you've got 12 rooms, all 12 rooms aren't at the same part of the growing cycle. You've got your mother plants, you've got your clones, you've got your full veg. So the whole point of that is there's a cycle, just like on a farm, you're kind of moving the cycle from room to room. And so there is some flushing involved, but very rarely when the plants are in there. It does happen. I know there's salt content and stuff that can happen, but most of the time you're not displacing so much water that should be your number one concern. Not to mention the plumber on site or the GC is probably going to be more concerned with drains than you are. Your concern should be letting as little water as possible into those drains to kind of prove your point that we know what we're doing.
Yeah, really good point, Michael.
One more thing I put this in there is the friction loss. Friction loss is a huge one. A big concern with when kind of unqualified contractors or installers come to me with questions. I can tell right away if they know how to read a friction loss chart. You do need to account for that. We're running pipe up and down walls and over scaffoldings that maybe we weren't before, just like fiber optic cables, in an office. We're privy a lot of times to grade changes in landscape and the depths of our ditches. Even in somewhere as pancake as Florida, we're ultimately usually moving water up and moving it down. If it's not in water towers, it's through pump stations. And so we do account for friction loss. And so when you start running 1-inch pipe up 12 feet, down 12 feet, then across a room 60 feet, all of a sudden friction loss does play a little bit more of a role. So keep an eye on your flows and make sure you account for that. And you can do so by referencing a friction loss chart. Any manufacturer's rep or distributor sales rep is going to know how to read one of these charts. So feel free to ask them and they can help you. And obviously flow and then pressure are going to be the two main design variables that you need to be aware of, just like when we're doing things outside. So make sure you glue everything together well.
Yeah, so speaking of charts and catalogs, that's where I usually find my charts, is in catalogs. Didn't you create a design guide for indoor?
Yeah, so to eliminate some of the burden that I see day to day, anything from outdoor growers to indoor growers, the last thing I'm going to do is walk into a site and see a problem that the next grower down the road is going to have and not try to document it. So the beauty of having some of the resources and assets I have, I'm able to compile them into these design guides, and they're ever changing. They're digital aspects. So maybe if you're in Oregon growing and instead of Colorado, or Colorado instead of Southern California, there might be some design discrepancies that are a little different. And we don't want to print a book that's 60 pages long. They're out there. But we want short, concise guides. So this doesn't seem overwhelming to you and your team. This is something you can hand out to the 10 guys that work for you before you go on an operation. And you should be good to go. And they'll quickly see that it's a lot of components they're familiar with. And the ones they aren't, you can ask plenty of questions and bid accordingly and reach out to us, especially if you're interested in using our products.
Yeah, and I want to be the first to say the indoor design guide is fabulous. Talk about giving you a great head start on doing one of these projects. You should check that out. In fact, we'll send a link in the email after this of the recording. We'll send a link to the design guide as well. Michael, fabulous job today. I learned always so much when you come on, and I'm excited to help some contractors move their business forward. And one last thing I just want to ask you, it's really okay for people to contact you and say, hey, I'm looking for some indoor business as a contractor. You know anyone who needs a contractor?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share it with our network of distributors because the distributors are the ones that are always asking if they know somebody that can install the product for them. And so, feel free to reach out to me for that. I'm at all these shows. I'm speaking at the Water Summit in Orlando later this month. I try to be out there. So anytime I'm out there, you can ask me questions. You can email me. Please don't send me like a napkin drawing of your 40-room project and expect me to get the hydraulics back to you by Friday. I tend to stay away from design, as most people know out there, without being directly involved with the installation. It's hard for someone to design a system without asking a million questions. It becomes kind of a resource of its own. I think it's maybe a part 2 of this webinar is contractors that want to get interested in indoor design. I know from ASIC and the consultants, they're interested in indoor design, especially with racking systems that are going in, the size of Home Depots now. So there is design resources that are needed for this market as well. But I think once the contractors kind of give their feedback, just like we did in landscape, it'll make the design, stuff fall into place. And that's what we need right now.
Yeah, really good points, Michael. Thank you. Thanks for putting this on. I want to say thank you to everybody who watched today. As you know, you can view all our trainings at the janesusa.com/trainings page, or just search for Jane's Trainings and you'll find it too, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. I love the concept that people are in their workday educating themselves on water conservation or proper irrigation practices. It helps us get up and do this every day. So thanks everybody for following and watching. And we're going to be back on Friday talking about carbon capture as it pertains to agriculture. Jim Loria from Maisie is going to be talking about that. It's absolutely fascinating. So anyway, thanks again, Michael. Thanks to everybody. And we'll see you guys back here on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.